Who is Jesus? It's a question that we've considered and will continue to consider throughout, hopefully, the course of this year. But the reason why the answer to this question is so important is because it doesn't just have slight consequences. It has eternal consequences. And at the end of the day, at the end of the ages, everyone will answer this question or will give an account for how they have answered this question. And so it's not just intellectually knowing who Jesus is. It's actually about using your volition, your decision-making, and your lifestyle of whether you really know who Jesus is. I was watching a clip last night of an interview with Jordan Peterson, who has become pretty wide known as he's a clinician, he's a psychologist. But anyway, he has a fascination with the Bible. He's not necessarily, he's theist. I don't know that he would consider himself Christian at all. But he does believe that there has to be at least some higher being. But he's had a fascination with the Bible and has spent many years talking about it and studying it and even lecturing on it. And one of the things that he said in this short interview clip that I was watching was, he said, look, people come to me and they say all the time, I'm a believing Christian. And he says, really? Really? You know that means more than just saying the phrase, I believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God. That's easy to say. As a matter of fact, that can be a hindrance to some people's development. He's like, we look at it through a 21st century shallow understanding of the word believe, and we think, oh yeah, as long as I believe that Jesus is who he said he was, I intellectually believe that, that's okay. He said, no, you're missing the whole point. It's not just about intellectually believing something. He said, what most of those people who say those things to me don't understand is that it's not about intellectually assenting. It's about giving your whole life to him. Now, these are the words that are coming from someone who himself has yet to fully accept Jesus. And one of the reasons why he hasn't is because he knows the consequences of fully embracing Jesus. But he does make a solid point that a lot of people who claim to have accepted Jesus, and they think they're okay because they mentally believe that Jesus is the Son of God. It's not what Jesus had in mind. That's not what this question has in mind. It's not so much an interest of the words that would come out of our mouth. Yes, I think Jesus is the Son of God, but actually living and investing ourselves in the truth of who we believe he is. And so, as we've thought about this question some, we looked at the start of the year in John chapter 1, at John's prologue, John 1 through 18, and considered his incarnation, who he is, as he is God coming down in the flesh and dwelling amongst us. Then we spent some time looking at his perfection, that he was sinlessly perfect, and why that's so important for what God is doing in the world. But today I want us to turn our attention to his crucifixion. And when you think about the crucifixion of Jesus, there are literally hundreds of angles to consider. And probably hundreds more that have not even occurred to me or been on my radar. But when we think about it, there are multiple ways of thinking about it. First of all, you can think about his crucifixion through what the Old Testament pictures and foreshadows and shows us about what was coming. You can look at the Gospels and see how each one of the writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, writings for specific purposes to specific audiences, trying to communicate something to their audience, how they viewed the cross. It's not, listen, the idea people have, they're like, the Gospels contradict each other because they don't say the exact same thing. That is so foolish. It doesn't really deserve to be answered, but we will, okay? Just because they don't say the same thing, they're not writing to the same person for the same purpose. Of course they're not going to say the same thing. There are going to be similarities, but there are also going to be differences. So you can look at what the gospel writers, how they present the crucifixion of Jesus, how you get into their skin and kind of see the world through their eyes and what they're trying to communicate to us. You can look at the epistles, the letters, and see how they view the crucifixion. How did Paul view the crucifixion? In Galatians chapter 3, he compared it to Jesus taking the curse of the law. Or 2 Corinthians chapter 5, it was God in Christ reconciling the world to himself. Or the way Peter gives an extended discussion of Isaiah 53 at the end of 1 Peter chapter 2. And so there are countless angles. Now the one we want to take is to look through the eyes of the gospel writer, of one gospel writer, and that's Mark. Mark is most likely the first gospel that was written. Okay? That's debated. It doesn't really change anything whether it's true or whether it's not. But it just appears that it was the first of the Gospels to be written. And so as we look through his eyes this morning in Mark 15, and then, of course, we'll have to finish it up tonight because we've got a pretty large section here. Mark 15, 1 through 39. And there are three words I want us to consider. Number one, when he presents the crucifixion, he presents it first as substitution. Second, he presents it as a procession, and we might add a triumphal procession. And then number three, which definitely will be denied, I'm not sure whether we'll get to two this morning or not, is recognition. There are sequentially things to recognize as we come to the close of our section in verses 33 to 39. So let's begin, first of all, with the idea of substitution. Okay? So as we begin, as the gospel writer begins, in Mark 15, it says this: "And as soon as it was morning, and the chief priests held a consultation, and the elders and the scribes and the whole council, and they bound Jesus and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate." This is after his Jewish trial in the evening, which is at the conclusion of chapter 14. "And Pilate asked him, 'Are you the king of the Jews?' And he answered him, 'You have said so.' And the chief priest asked him many things, and Pilate asked him again. Or the chief priest accused him of many things, and Pilate asked him again, 'Have you no answer to make? See how many charges they bring against you.' But Jesus made no further answer, so that Pilate was amazed." Never seen someone who could take accusations and yet remain cool. Now, the first thing to see about this is that this is a bookend of our section. Okay? So, here's the thing. Stories are told creatively. Okay? Stories are told creatively. And there are usually markers in the story that can kind of clue you into the fact of what the writer is thinking and how he's composing it. Now, the way this chapter begins is Jesus before a Roman ruler examining him and asking him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Now, the next question is, but how does the section end? Well, in Mark 15 and verse 39, it ends with another Roman who is a centurion saying, "Truly this man was the Son of God." Do you see the progression in thought? Just by looking at the beginning and at the end, you can see the progression of thought that's going to flow all throughout this section. And so this presents the first part of the bookend where a Roman ruler is asking Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And at the end, you've got a Roman centurion, a soldier, who's saying Jesus is the Son of God, which, by the way, is a rarity in Mark's gospel. It's only said 3 times. We've talked about this on a Sunday night, I think, when we were still meeting in the multipurpose room. But the only people in Mark's gospel that proclaim him to be the Son of God are 1, Mark himself, Mark 1 and verse 1. 2, demon-possessed individuals in Mark 3:11. And 3, a Roman centurion. Notice his disciples never understand, never utter those words out of their mouth. Not in Mark's gospel. And so we're being introduced to this theme that's going to be developed. But there's also this theme of kingship that runs all throughout this. Over and over and over again, he's going to be asked the same thing, or he's going to be accused of, whether it be mocking or whether it be serious in an inquisition from Pilate. Are you the king of the Jews? That's the question. That's what they're calling him. And so Pilate asks the question, are you the king of the Jews? Later, they will look and they will look at him and say, if you're the king of the Jews, come down from the cross, save yourself. The Roman soldiers will carry the accusation that says this is the king of the Jews. There's something here about his kingship that's going to, I hope, become really, really prevalent for us as we move into the next section of our study and we see how Mark presents Jesus as a triumphant king, which is actually dripping in irony because it would appear that just the opposite is happening. And so he's being presented to us to set the narrative and to set the stage for his kingship. But here's the point. This is part of the irony of it all. Pilate doesn't really believe it. He's asking him. Oh, those that are standing around him don't really believe it. They're mocking him. But what's the irony? It's true. It's true. And one of the lessons we need to take from this is just because I can't see something being true doesn't make it untrue. And if you're going to encounter Jesus and I'm going to encounter Jesus, it doesn't really matter what you see or what I see. It matters about what is true. That's the problem. So many people, when they interact with Jesus, they either ask him a question that they're not really interested in, okay, who are you? Or they say it to Jesus in mocking, Jesus, he's not really going to do anything. He's kind of like a little lamb whose little legs are tied up. Be cautious. Anytime we interact with the divine, it's serious. But then we come to this next section under the idea of substitution, and that's where we see this exchange for Barabbas. This exchange for Barabbas that was read for us a moment ago. They come to Pilate and ask him, that was his custom, to release to them one of their notorious prisoners, someone that it was a gesture of goodwill to try and keep things going in the right direction, keep insurrection down. And so he asked them, do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews? But verse 11, the chief priest stirred up the crowd to have him release for them Barabbas instead. Then Pilate again said to them, then what shall I do with the man you call the king of the Jews? And they said, let him be crucified. Pilate said, why? What evil has he done? There's no crime in him. But they shouted all the more, crucify him. So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. You see that exchange? Okay, now let's think about that exchange a little bit. Barabbas is one of the most pivotal individuals in understanding the cross as substitution. Barabbas many times is not given much of a glance, but he's the guy that really helps us to understand this element. Now, I want you to think about him. Barabbas, what does that name mean? I mean, you can cheat. It's on the screen. Okay, so look at it. Bar, that's the way it begins, B-A-R. That's a common Jewish prefix to describe son of. For an example, in Matthew 16, after Peter makes the confession, Jesus said, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, Bar-John, son of John. So Bar, B-A-R, is son of. When Jesus in Mark 14 prays to the Father, Mark gives us a detail that none of the others give. He doesn't just call him Father, he calls him Abba. Bar Abba. Son of the Father. Most likely, the best educated guess we can give is that maybe his father was a rabbi, a well-known rabbi teacher. You remember Matthew 23, Jesus condemned them, said because they liked to have people call them Father. So here he is, son of the Father. And he's been arrested for an insurrection in the city, a rebellion. And when you piece together all of the gospel accounts, we understand that he has murdered and plundered. Now, who has he murdered? Well, most likely it's been a Roman. Who Barabbas is most likely is a false Messiah figure. What was the Jewish notion of Messiah? What was God's anointed one going to be? He was going to be the ruler who was going to throw off government oppression, going to throw off the oppression of the oppressing nation, and then was going to bring them and usher them back into the golden days of Saul, David, and Solomon. When they were an independent nation and a national superpower, that's what they were looking for. In the years preceding the first century, in the first century, and toward the latter ends of the first century. For an example, in Acts chapter 5, when the apostles are arrested, Gamaliel speaks up on their behalf, and he says, listen, there were two men already in recent history who claimed to be the Christ and led an insurrection thinking they were going to overthrow Rome. And they ended up being put down. Gamaliel says, these people are claiming the same thing. So if they're not legitimate, God will put them down. But what does it show you? It shows you a consistent pattern, not just biblically, but historically, of individuals stepping up, claiming to be the Christ, claiming to be the Messiah. And here it is, Barabbas is claiming the same thing. That's what led him to lead an insurrection, not just to be a part of the insurrection, but to lead the insurrection in the city. And for that, obviously, he was unsuccessful, and he's put in prison. But ultimately, even though he's guilty, he's released. He is as guilty can be, sentenced to die. As a matter of fact, the cross that Jesus died on, who was supposed to die there that day? Barabbas. So then you take it and you look at Jesus very clearly, not just son of a father, son of the father, son of some famous rabbi, but the living Son of God, who did not lead a rebellion in the city in the sense of trying to overthrow a government, but brought peace between God and man. You could argue he led a rebellion, not a political rebellion, but a spiritual rebellion against the forces of darkness. And he found himself imprisoned for it. And he himself was truly innocent. In every way the word can be understood, Jesus was truly innocent. And yet he was crucified. Do you see the exchange? The guilty is pardoned and the innocent is punished. That's the gospel. That is the gospel message. Now, I want you to think about how that comes down to us, because Mark is not just concerned with us looking and saying, hey, look, I want you to know about this guy named Barabbas, okay? And, they asked for him instead of Jesus, and as long as you know that, I feel like my job in writing to you is now complete. That's not really what Mark's thinking. You see, Mark is calling us to make an examination of ourselves. Because how many of us look to false messiahs to save us? People say, I'm not looking to some political ruler. Well, some people are, but Let me ask you something. Why is it that the crowd wanted Barabbas and not Jesus? It's quite simple. What was their notion of Messiah? Political force ruler, killing people, overthrowing. That was their idea. So who was their guy? Barabbas. They chose Barabbas because he fit their idea of who the Messiah should be. And they rejected Jesus because he did not fit their idea of who the Messiah should be. Now that better start making you and me uncomfortable. Because the Jesus that exists in the minds and hearts of many of us is not who Jesus is. It's who we want him to be. It's who we demand that he be. It is not who he is. Think about all the things we turn to and don't even realize it to save us. Well, I've heard it in conversations with individuals. A man flat out just said it. Why do I need God? I have money and I have my family and I've got everything I need. Why do I need him? What's he looking to? Well, in that case, he's looking to two things to save him. He's looking to his money. He's looking to his family. Listen, I don't care if a person has $1 zillion or they have $0. That makes no difference to me. I'm not jealous of either one of them. But if you think your money can save you, you are as deceived as possible, as it is humanly possible. I'm going to go out on a limb and say no one in this room is as wealthy as Steve Jobs, and his money could not cure his cancer. All of the wealthiest people down through the ages, their money could not save them. Oh, but I can buy the best medical treatment there is. But the best medical treatment there is, when the doctor has finished his work, who does he call? Your money can't save you. I don't care how much or how little we have. But we look to it all the time. It'll get us out of this problem. It'll solve a problem. If I can just write a check, I can end this problem. Well, you might end some problems that way, but you will not end the problem of what you do with Jesus with a check. He doesn't want your money. He doesn't need your money. It's all his to begin with. People say, you're being a little straightforward. You're absolutely right, I am. We are not Jesus, and we need to get that. People say, I'm going to look to my family. I got my family. And what happens when your family dies? Oh, my kids, I'm going to make my kids, they're my trophies. They're great performers. They go out and they're successful and they do all these things. But what happens when your child falls flat on his or her face and makes a monumental mistake and embarrasses the fire out of you in front of your entire community? What will you do then? Furthermore, what you're asking of your child is so unfair to ask them to save you by their accomplishments. Well, I'm in pretty good shape. I take care of myself. Okay. There are world record holding Olympic athletes who are dead. I mean, take care of yourself. It can do some things that make your life longer, maybe more pleasant, but it won't save you. Or we look to educational accomplishment, prowess, all these different things. Do you think God cares how many diplomas you have? He doesn't. And I'll just go ahead and put myself at the front of the line. God is not impressed by my degrees in biblical studies. Not one bit. I won't be able to look at Jesus at the end of the day and go, look now, I didn't really believe, I believed you were real, and I studied a whole lot about you, and I passed a whole lot of tests and wrote a whole lot of papers and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, you're going to look at me and say, I don't care. Why are you looking to that stuff to save you? I was your Savior. The only chance that you have and that I have is in Jesus. Now, before I move to that, there's one more I want to touch. And that is this notion that we can save ourselves. Now, we don't say it that way, but we think it. We think, you know, I'm a good person. I'm going to go to heaven. I'm going to say something right now that's going to be incredibly hard for some people to hear. But it is the gospel truth, and I will not back away from it. Good people don't go to heaven. Good people don't go to heaven. Redeemed people go to heaven. Because there is no amount of good that you can do or that I can do that would say to God, you have to take me. No one goes to heaven and rejects Jesus, period. Those are his own words. I myself, if we were to literally translate John 14:6, I myself and no other am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. People say, I don't like it. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if you like it or if I like it. It's the way it is. The only way we can be saved is through substitution, the exchange. This is what Jesus meant in Mark chapter 10, verse 45, when he says, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom as a payment for many. Or in chapter 14, when he's instituting the Lord's Supper, which we just partook of, what did he say? This bread is my body, this cup is my blood, which is shed or poured out for many. In exchange for many. That's it. There is no other way than him. And you will never find a better deal in your lifetime. Where the guilty is freed and the innocent is punished so that the guilty can go free. Because that's what Jesus voluntarily did on our behalf. He took the cross. The cross that Jesus died on that day was supposed to be the cross Barabbas died on. But not just the cross that Barabbas was supposed to die on, it's the same cross that we should have died on. And he took it. So that leads us to the question then. What will we do with Jesus? Who is he? He's a crucified Lord, and he is the only Savior of the world, and no one will be saved, as the apostles would say in Acts 4 and verse 12, and neither is there salvation in any other, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, are we going to look to ourselves? Are we going to look to something else, some other person, another group of people, some other inanimate object, and say, that's going to deliver me? It won't. Or are we going to look at Jesus and say, you took my place. You took what I deserved. And I believe it, and I'm willing to lay my life in front of you. Because isn't that what Jesus said? You remember when Peter confesses Jesus to be the Christ in Mark 8, in Mark's account. You remember he immediately after he does that, he tells them he has to go to Jerusalem and be killed and crucified and scourged, and on the third day rise again. And Peter does what? No, Messiah can't do that. What did Jesus say? He said, get behind me, Satan. You're savoring the things of God and not of men. But ultimately he said this, not only is it going to happen to me, but it's also got to happen to you. And anyone who would come after me has to deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. So that's the question. Are we willing to follow Jesus? If I'm willing to accept and get to the end of myself and the end of all the false saviors that exist and come before the true Savior of the world who has given himself in my place, meet him where he gave his life for me, come to him penitent, confessing him, yes, in mouth, but also in deed. And meet him, be baptized into his death, Romans 6, and meet him at his saving work. And come up to walk in newness of life. That's who Jesus is, and that's what he desires. And if we can help you with that this morning, we want to, as we stand and sing this song.